once again to the official MUFON podcast. I'm your host, Richard Beckwith. Tonight, my guest is my dear friend, Dr. Stansilav O'Jack. He is the greatest UFO and parapsychological researcher you have never heard of. Dr. O'Jack attended 9 different universities over the course of his life. He possesses numerous degrees, including a B.S. in mechanical engineering, an M.A. in architecture and design, and a Ph.D. in clinical psychology. He has worked closely with the likes of Dr. William Tiller, Professor Emeritus at Stanford University, and co-founder of the Institute for Noetic Sciences. He was with Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and Ingo Swann at the Stanford Research Institute for the now infamous Psi experiments that led to the development of the CIA's remote viewing program. He conducted research projects for a number of governmental agencies, including the CIA. Among them, a project to seek out, identify, and cultivate psychically gifted children. I met Stanislav many years ago when I was doing a lecture on UFOs and the nature of reality. He introduced himself to me after my talk, and we have been close friends ever since that time. Tonight, I am very proud to welcome my dear, dear friend and mentor, Dr. Stansilav O'Jack.
I want you to tell me about your background, about your educational background.
Well, it's quite extensive in the sense that I kept changing professions. I have a background at Eastern Michigan University in mechanical engineering. And I worked for a Hoover Ball Bearing Company, mostly in doing statistics. I spent my time with him on a Friedman calculator. And then I entered the University of Michigan to study architecture and design, worked for different architects, had the good fortune to meet Frank Lloyd Wright, which was a great experience for me. Then I changed to industrial design, Cranbrook Academy of Art, and at that time I was involved in entering different undergraduate competitions, had the good fortune to take first place and won several other competitions. And while there, I was doing architectural models. I did one for Mr. Yamasaki, the one who had designed the Twin Towers that went down 9/11. After that, I went into education, and I was a headmaster of a private school, J. Krishnamurti. I spent a year there. Then I went into teaching. I went abroad for 2 years in Yugoslavia, taught in college level. Then at age 46, I decided none of the professions really appealed to me on a long-term basis, so I returned to school at age 46 and received a BA, MA, and PhD in clinical psychology. At that time, I was involved in some strange photographic experiences with my cameras. I met Dr. William Tiller at Stanford University, and as a result of that meeting, I was involved in a research we called subtle energy for several years, during which time I had the opportunity to meet people like Uri Geller, which was a lot of fun. And from that point, I started writing, mostly experimental writing, attempting to determine if I was satisfied with psychology and was I satisfied with subtle energy. Then I became involved in 1974 when I was studying psychology in UFOs, because I had an experience in 1966 Ann Arbor, Michigan, the experience with UFO that was pretty much made fun of by our government, Dr. Hynek, who later became a strong believer in UFOs. Since then, I attend different conferences, one relative to my licensure. I'm a licensed mental health worker in Wyoming and Colorado. I have the good fortune to meet people such as Stan Roman. I've done a lot of work with Stan, and attended many UFO conferences here in Wyoming, sponsored and directed by Dr. Leo Sprinkle.
Now you say you became interested in UFOs because of an experience that you had.
1966.
Can you tell me about that?
Yes. I was driving from California to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to visit my father and my brother and my son. And about halfway between Jackson, Michigan and Ann Arbor, they're separated by about, I think, approximately 40, 50 miles. About halfway towards Ann Arbor, which is driving east, I saw something in the sky. As a youth, at age 14, I became a member of the Civil Air Patrol. All I wanted to do was fly. That's very much. And at that time, I became really involved in Theosophical studies too. So there was a lot of spiritual and paranormal interests. And as I was driving along to Ann Arbor, I saw this spot in the sky. I was looking at it to identify the configuration, because when I, in the Civil Air Patrol, also I enlisted the Army Air Corps when I was 16. You had to be able to identify about 200 silhouettes. So I looked at it, and at that time, no way it would be a helicopter, because our helicopters were not advanced at that time. It was quite a large object, about, I'd say, 2,000 feet up. It wasn't very high. And I couldn't figure the configuration because I couldn't see wings. It wasn't a chopper, but it was stationary. And I had a radio on because I'd drive to listen to music. And I was looking at that object, wondering what it might be. I kept moving my head, thinking it might be a spot on the windshield. And all of a sudden, it just went from my right to the left towards Ann Arbor, Dexter, Michigan. And I was stunned. I thought, gee, that's right. I can't imagine what can move that fast. Well, the radio was on, and suddenly it was interrupted by a newscast, and a flying saucer had been sighted by various highway patrolmen, and it landed in what they call the marshland of Dexter, Michigan, which I thought was humorous, because there's no marshland in Dexter. There's some small lakes. I used to go there for water skiing when I lived in Ann Arbor. I lived in Ann Arbor, and I was attending the University of Michigan. And that was the end of the program, and I thought it was interesting. It wasn't until later years that I heard about it again, because nothing was really printed up at that time. That was my first exposure. The next exposure was years later, about 1984. I was stepfather to two blind daughters, so I'd drive back east or fly back east and help them enter college, and also in breaks I'd pick them up, or at the end of the semester I'd bring them back home. And I usually sleep on airplanes. Gives me time for rest. But this time, when I was waiting for the plane, I went to the little shop there to sell books and candy bars. I always liked to watch on a candy bar. And I picked up a book, which I normally don't do, and it said something about UFOs, so I thought I'd read it. So I read it on a plane. It was about Leo Sprinkle and one of his colleagues, at least that's how I identify it. His name was Pat Mcguire. Pat Mcguire owned, at that time, a ranch north of Laramie, I think about 18 miles. And his ranch was off Highway 30 onto the Turkleary Road, which is 340 going to Douglas. So when I entered, I decided to attend my first UFO conference. So I went to the UFO conference. met Dr. Leo Sprinkle, which I didn't know, who I did not know at that time. And I asked him, what's this thing about Pat Mcguire and all this? He said, if you'd like to meet him, I'll make arrangements. So I met with Pat Mcguire and his wife. Pat, I think at that time, maybe about 45 years old, and his wife looked like she's early 20s. They had 2 children. And we met in a restaurant in Laramie. And I asked him about his ranch and what he had read in his book, and I wanted to substantiate it. He said, it's true. He said, the aliens land on his property frequently. He had a few thousand acres. It was a very large ranch that he had. And he told me about the story where he tried several times to find water, drilling for his cattle and farming, and could not find any water. And then all of a sudden these aliens show up in UFOs. So he made what he called a deal or bargain with them. If they would show him where to find water, they could use his property freely. So they marked a spot, they drilled and found water after many, many attempts of not finding it. So he told me, I asked for permission to go to this property because I wanted to visit the property. He said, sure. You have one day to do it because the government is taking it away from me. He said, I can't begin to tell you the problem I've had with the U.S. government or some members of the government. He used the expression black op, but it was something of that nature. It was very suspect. Now, I wasn't sure if this was delusional or this was real. So I thought, I'm going to go out there and look at it. So at a noontime break, I thought, I'll go out during the lunch break so I don't want to miss any part of this UFO stuff, which this is my first exposure. And for the last session I studied just before noon was where people talked about their experiences, but you can't ask questions, and there's no photography was private. And I was listening to these people, and I thought, some of these people are loonies. I mean, I wasn't impressed at all. And a couple sound possible. And as I walked out, 2 of the ladies that were there, one about 27, 29 and 30, approached me and asked if he could talk to me. Because we have name tags. Mine said Dr. O'Jack. Mm-hmm. So they said, when they were young, and maybe 6 to 10 years old, they had friends that they would meet out in the fields because they're pretty remote in that area. I can't think of the name of that highway, but it's the one that goes west and up over the top. There's a lake. You come down to the Saratoga. And they talked about the playmate they had. It was very strange looking. And then one day, the youngest one disappeared. She was gone for a week. There was panic. They couldn't figure out what happened. They thought she was kidnapped. Then she shows up again. And she's perfectly healthy. Well, she's perfectly healthy until now. She's aged, I'd say, 25 to 26, somewhere like that. And the reason they wanted to talk to me is she's married, tried to have a baby, and couldn't get pregnant. So she had an exam and found that her uterus had been removed surgically when she was a child. And at that point I thought, oh, you must be talking about aliens and things of that nature. They said, yes, we want to talk to you. You're a psychologist. You're here, so we wanted to share with you. At this point, we're at the ranch. So we drove around, looked at the ranch. There's a dirt road off at, I think it's 340, going north. And we found the Mcguire's house. It's actually, what do you call it, factory homes. And had a large light up there. So we looked around and drove back. So we got back, I went to my session, and I never saw them again. I wondered whatever happened to them. So I planned to go that night. So I'm going down to that ranch because Mcguire doesn't own it tomorrow. So about I'd say near 8 o'clock, I was going to take off and go to the ranch. Again, I'm driving my Subaru. And a fellow who was a chiropractor, I hadn't seen for years, shows up. He has no interest. I didn't know he had interest in UFOs in the first place. But he heard, somehow he heard I was there. So he asked me if he could spend some time with me. I said, well, not really. I said, I have something I have to do. He said, what? I figured, well, since he's here at the UFO conference, I can mention it. I said, I'm going out to the Mcguire Ranch. I want to see what happens. I hear that UFOs show up there, and also aliens. He's going to go with you. I said, oh, okay. So we jumped my car, so we had to ignore it. He said, can you stop for a minute at the motel? My wife and 12-year-old son there, I want to tell them I'm going with you. I said, sure. So we stopped at the motel. Yeah. It was in there too long, so I started getting a little concerned why. They all came out. And he said, they want to come too. And at that point I realized I lost control, because no way you could get 4 people in my Subaru, Brad. So we took their 4-wheel drive vehicle. I think it was a Jeep or something of that nature. And I had my cameras with me. I carried 2 cameras, one with infrared and one with 100 ASA color film. So I thought, I'm not sure I like this, but I need to be courteous. So we went out to the ranch. By this time it's 10:30, 11 o'clock. And I knew how to get there because I've gone out during the day purposely. I wanted to see landmarks. I wanted to see where there are buildings, so I don't mistake something because it may look like a presence of some UFO, and actually it's a farmhouse or something like that nature. So we get out to the ranch, and off for the 340 to that Mcguire's home. It's quite a distance, I'll say a half mile. So we got out there, and he has a security light, like a street light by his house. And there's a small knoll to the east. So they're walking around. I thought, I'll climb up to that knoll. So I walked on top of the knoll, and during the time I was doing my research, which is still at shortly after I completed my Ph.D., I had become friends with a fellow around Tehachapi, California. His name was Trevor Constable. And Trevor Constable he told me he used to see all kind of UFOs where he was, because there's an air base around there. And he said, if you ever want to see a UFO, do the star exercise, the yoga star exercise. Well, I'd been studying yoga since I was 12. So I'm on top of this knoll, and I started doing a star exercise, where you extend your arms out to right like this, and you rotate 90 degrees. And I don't know, it sounds very superstitious, what the heck. I'm willing to try anything if it's not dangerous. So I did the star exercise. All of a sudden, I look up, there are 3 UFOs. They were in higher, more than 1,000 feet up. Wow, that's fantastic. Then I became aware of the fact there was screaming going on. And I looked down, and this man, I can't use his name, and his wife, they're panicking. I mean, they're screaming. So I thought, well, I better go take her to a mental health because I went down there. And I was trying to calm him down, and I realized I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I said, well, let's get in the car and go back to Laramie. Well, we got in the car, all the time the screaming. The wife was screaming and crying, the son was panicking, I mean, both were panicking. The husband wasn't that much out of control, but he was really nervous. I felt like I could just slap him in the face a few times to straighten him out. So I got in the back of this Jeep, and the 3 of them were in front. Now this kid is 12 years old. He's sitting on his mother's lap, and she's in here screaming and crying. That's why you say they were hysterical. So I'm driving back to the Churchill Highway, and I'm saying to myself, boy, I really screwed this one up. I didn't take any pictures. I came for that purpose. So we got to the Blacktop Road. I hang a right to go west to intersect Highway 30, because this highway ends at Highway 30. As we were driving along, I felt something funny. So I turned around, looked out the back window. It's 3 UFOs. They're following us. I said they're up about, at this point, let's say, I can still see it. I see 1,000 feet up. I thought, fantastic. So I took out my cameras and I figured that's pretty far away. What the heck? I'll try anyways. So I started clicking off some frames. They had just stopped being hysterical, still crying and sobbing. And when they heard the click of the camera turn around, they saw the UFOs. They panicked all over again. So we got to Highway 30. I said, stop. At this point, there's a thunderstorm. There was some rain, but not much. But there was lightning things. And a lot of thunder. So we stopped on the highway. And I said, stop here. So we got out. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm walking back to the ranch. They said, that's about 12 miles away. I said, I don't care. I want to go back. Because this time I couldn't see the UFOs up above anymore. So I'm facing east. They're facing west. And then an intersection of, I'll call it 340. I think that's great. Whatever, it's a Churchill Highway. A junction with Highway 30. And Laramie's to my right, which would be south. I'm looking at them, talking to him, trying to explain, go ahead and leave me alone. When I see something about maybe 150 feet away from me, and it's strange, it looked like the windows of a Pullman boxcar. And they were off-white, bluish-white color. And then it kept getting more and more intense, blue-white, then into a real bright blue, and then off. I thought, what the heck is that? I said, I know there's no building there, because that's why I went out during the day. There's no farm, no nothing. And then it started all over again. It went on several times. At this point, I take out my cameras, I had them strapped on. I started walking across the street. They didn't see these. They turned and they saw them. They panicked again. And there was a barbed wire fence. It was more than 4 feet high. We pretty much scaled of 4 feet. It must have been about 5 feet high. And I thought, can I scale this thing? So I found a post to try to climb. I couldn't do it. In fact, I was worried about ripping my hands and my clothing. So what was interesting was, if I looked straight at this object, like a Pullman car, the windows straight ahead were rectangular, but they kept getting shorter and shorter as they went left and right. I thought, that's interesting. So then I went around onto Highway 340 to see if I could find some entrance there, but it was barbed wire, it was all farmland. And as I did, the same configuration remained. It was always the same, square in front of me and small left right. Finally realized, whatever that thing is about, could be 30 feet in diameter. It's a UFO. I'm sure it is, because the way the size of the windows change in configuration. Then I realized they were screaming. I had pretty much shut them out. So I think I have 2 cameras. So I rolled off 72 frames. Infrared and 100 ASA. Now I knew that flash only carries 25 feet, that I might not get in. Of course there's many, infinite number of planets, infinite number of entities. Some may look exactly like us, some might not, as we do. I'm a very strong, I'd like to say, knower in regards to UFOs and that. When I was watching a TV the other night, History Channel. They had a short blurb with Harry Truman signing his document. And when I listen to that comment that's made over and over, the reason I'm not telling the public at large is because the public might panic and therefore there'd be hysteria. And they relate it to the Orson Welles radio program, The War of the Worlds. I heard that thing. I didn't panic. I don't recall. I know we laughed at it where I grew up. So I began to assess the mentality these people were making these statements. And I said, it cannot have anything to do with panic of the public, because the public is more open than this select group. Therefore, it has to do with something that already is known, that we do not know, where they're accessing some kind of information to progress our technical advancements of our species through our country. And whenever I read this material, it substantiates my initial concept that when I look at the various CDs that I have, or DVDs, and I see the historical information of depicted UFOs and things of that nature, I laugh at the idiocy or the criminality of those who make the statement denying the public from that information. I think it's very sad.
How long have you felt that the information's being kept from the general public?
1966, when Hynek made fun of it, when he said swamp gas, I said, "You kidding?" It was about 12 noon. You don't see swamp gas. Besides, there was no swamp in Dexter until I knew the area very well. I said, therefore, this guy's lying. So, nothing new to me.
I think that was probably the same reaction that was held by then Senator Gerald Ford, who was from Michigan, right?
Oh, he was from Michigan.
And I think
Ford, he believed in the UFOs. Actually, his position was contrary to what Hynek had said.
I think that there were actually hearings that took place as a result of that. Hynek's explanation was that, that the witnesses had seen swamp gas, and of course, I think that upset Ford, who said that was just a ridiculous explanation.
Exactly. I agreed with him.
I think Hynek would later agree that that was a ridiculous
absolutely.
explanation.
Later, I developed a great respect for Hynek and what he was doing, how he was doing it. He sought information, found the information, and deduced it, and reduced it, until it was so obvious there's something that we don't know too much about. And in some respects, there are some of us that know a heck of a lot about it, but won't reveal it. I was watching a history last night. I replay it. I saved some of the programs. And it was the incident in England. I forget the name of that base.
Bentwaters.
That's it. And I was watching that, and I kept laughing. I thought, how many people really believe those who experienced it compared to those who denounce it? And I don't know the statistics, but my experience of people I've met in my lifetime, I'd say 75-80% believe it happened, and 20% are willing to believe that our government, because they think they're basically frightened that it might be true.
Yeah, I think the explanation for the Bentwaters incident was that the security personnel were seeing a light from the local lighthouse, as opposed to objects that were hovering over the base and shining beams on the weapon storage areas.
Well, last night, when I was watching, the two major officers, I can't think of the names, the ones who actually went out and saw it.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Jim Peniston.
Yeah, Peniston.
Yes.
They did a 30-year
John Burroughs.
Tour, and they could actually mark the spots, and you could see the lighthouse. It was ridiculous that things were said. And I thought, well, that's nothing new, because they've been doing it since the early part of this century.
Why aren't they telling us about it?
Yeah. Now, my uncle, my mother's younger brother, he was in the 101st Airborne. He was one of the few surviving paratroopers. He didn't want to go in the service. In fact, he wanted to be an actor and a dancer. In order to avoid being drafted, he was working in a factory. He stuck his index finger into a machine to get rid of the index finger on his right hand. That way he conceived they'll never take him because he can't fire a gun. Well, he got in. They should want to fire with the left hand. And it was years later, 1966, I was talking, he was working for Sperry Rand. And we were talking about different things. He was looking at all my drawings that I was submitting to. I was applying for a job with Thompson Rainbow Woolridge. And there was no one around, just he and myself. And he was about, say, 7 years older than I. And he looked to the left and looked to the right, and then in a sort of crouched position, and he said to me, "Let me tell you something." I said, "Tell me." He said, "We have so much going on. We have so many inventions. If I told you what they were," he said, "it would make Buck Rogers look primitive." Because when we grew up, it was Buck Rogers in the 30s. I said, "You mean rocket bets and all this stuff?" He said, "That's nothing." And then he stopped. And after that, he would never talk to me again. I'd call him and say how I was feeling. He'd hang up the phone. He said too much. That was enough there to tell me we have information either given to us or derived from some alien craft that is violent.
So you think it's because of technology that they're not telling us?
That's right. No, so many people focus on the Roswell, but there were incidents that occurred long before Roswell in this country too. Mm-hmm.
I want you to tell me about Dr. Tiller and the Theosophical Society.
Tiller.
Yeah, and not to be confused with Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the atomic bomb.
It's Teller.
Yeah.
It's Tiller, not Teller.
Okay, tell me about Dr.
Teller
Teller.
is the atom bomb, atomic bomb, and Tiller is a physicist. Now, they both were at Stanford University, as Dr. Klaus Heinemann. I work with him too. Dr. Tiller, the reason he and I became friends, I attended a conference in Carmel, California, where I was living at the time. And Dr. Tiller was making a presentation. Uri Geller, of course, 4 or 5 other names escaping that one. If I think about it, tell you. Anyways, listening to him, I thought, they're impressive people, both Tiller and Geller. And some fellow walked up to me, because the conference was over, the people were gathered on the stage talking to the presenters. This fellow walked up to him, his first name was Jack. He said, "Do you want to talk to Dr. Tiller?" I thought, how does he know that? I said, "Yes, I would." He said, "Why don't you go up?" I said, "No." That man just went through a very long presentation. I think it's discourteous to approach them after a conference. I think they should rest. He said, "Would you like to meet him?" I said, "Yeah, of course." He said, "Give me a telephone number." So I gave it to him. A few days later, I get a call from this fellow. He said, "I arranged for a meeting with you and Dr. Tiller." So he raised himself slightly. I thought, I don't know, I guess he really doesn't have time to see me. So I was going to walk out. He said, "Well, you want to talk to me?" I said, well, you're busy. He said, no, go ahead. I said, well, there's some photographs I want to show you. I wanted your comment on it. He said, sure. He took the photographs, very nonchalantly looked at them like his fingers were going like this. And I thought, I'm wasting his time and mine too. So I reached out to grab the photographs. I apologized for about it. I reached out to grab the photographs. What are you doing? I said, well, you don't have an interest in these. He said, oh, yes, I do. Leave them here. I want to meet with you again. That was the beginning of a long-term relationship. We still have. In fact, I spoke to Dr. just a couple of days ago. As a result of those photographs, there appeared to be not human forms, almost human-like in a sense. There's aspects of the configuration that might call legs or feet or a head or a face, but they're not detailed as you are right now in form. You can't see eyes, mouth, or things of that nature. And there are several of them. I was shot at this conference with a flash. It was an instamatic camera, so that'd be 126 film. And you see these configurations moving from my left to my right. Now, I don't think it was a bunch of configurations as much as it was two configurations passing through, and the camera kept getting reprints of it as it moved. It was very dark. It was about midnight. The conference was over, and they were singing some kind of short, sort of equivalent to a farewell, to culminate this thing. So only light in the entire auditorium, more like a stadium, was a center stage. No lights anywhere else. When you look at this photograph, there are light spots all over, and also other figures here, and these figures here. And the figures here have a line from the back going up into infinity. I remember when I first saw the figure, I thought, oh, that reminds me of the silver cord that's supposed to connect human beings to the Creator. There's something out of Theosophy that talks about the cord. That the references there in that monograph I just shared with you. As a result of those photographs, Dr. Tiller decided to do some kind of research. I said, fine. So we set up several sessions where I would attend a meeting where conceivably there would be increased energy. Concerts, definitely, weddings, funerals, something where there would be a different level of energy. And by accident, when I was taking some photographs, somebody pointed at me and started laughing. And I thought it'd be a bit discourteous. So I just approached, I dressed him, I said, what's going on? He said, look at your camera. So I did. And there's the lens cap was on the camera. So I looked at the numbers, so I took it, I recorded the numbers where I had shot with the lens cap. Well, when we developed them, there were photographs. Sometimes very strange things, not of this world like. Other times it was as though the lens cap had been removed. So when Dr. Tiller saw this, we did a whole series for about 4 or 5 years, lens cap photography. So he would attend some of the sessions, maybe rock concerts. One time we were in Washington, state of Washington, Seattle. Another time he went down to Los Angeles. Then he had his student who was just completing his Ph.D., Edwin Jung. He would go with me. Uri Geller, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and people like that nature. Trying to think of just many, many people. So we did this. Out of 5,000 photographs, there was a 22% anomalous rate. There was something strange. It was different from camera. I would have a tripod similar to the one you have there, and I have a cable release. But I had a special bracket on a tripod with two different cameras. I was in the habit of carrying this camera wherever I went, especially when I went on pilgrimage in Haifa, Israel. So I always had it in my left hand. I just wouldn't set it down. And Dr. Tiller calls it the energized can. So we had this set up. We had a tripod with two cameras, one cable release, which is easy to set up. By opening your lens, you can set up so the timing is perfect. One camera would have strange photographs, the other camera would be standard. So we did that. That's where the 5,000 photographs came from that. It still happens.
What do you think you were capturing with those cameras? What was it that you were photographing?
Sometimes people, sometimes religious places. I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith. I go to the Holy Land, and I'm very touched when I go to cemeteries. I pray for people because the body that's buried in the ground is a symbol of wherever that soul is. And then I understand the soul, they're all here right around us. We're never separated from it. The veil is how we look at it, mentally and spiritually, so they're always here. So when I pray for the people at a cemetery and take photographs, quite often get an image of someone.
So you're photographing spiritual energy?
That would be a good way of saying it, yes. Spiritual energy.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the Theosophical Society itself. Is this something that Dr.
That
Tiller
influenced me strongly.
Yeah, tell me about that.
At age 12, I was raised by a paternal grandfather, and he and my father were not. They didn't like each other. And I saw my father once when I was age 5, and once when I was age 12. I met one of the persons who was related to it, but no longer was a member. His name was J. Krishnamurti. In later years, I became headmaster of the school. He was a person who, around the turn of the century, 1900s, the Theosophists wanted him to acknowledge that he was the return of Christ. And he refused. He said, no, I'm not returning Christ. He's a seer. So I got to meet him when I was 12. And what I liked about the Theosophical Society, there was no limit in the way they looked at things. They looked at everything and introduced me to the paranormal and to the fact that seances have a way of accessing other dimensions, and prayer and meditation. So I learned the fundamentals of meditation. I was 12 years old, so I started meditating when I was 12. Or I started the process of meditation. But in keeping with the concept of meditation, with the one that was taught to me, which comes out of Hinduism, is when you reach a state of meditation, you're in an altered state. And there's several levels of meditation. The first aspect of meditation is called thinking, trying to decide what you want to meditate on. Then there's contemplation, focusing more clearly. Then there's meditation, you're in a meditative state. And then after that, there's a nirvanic state. And after that, there's a soul state. And after that, there's a God state. So when I hear people talk about meditation, their models aren't as extensive as one with which I was trained, which I happen to enjoy very much. How to prepare yourself on a daily basis, the thinking process. I became a vegetarian. I was for 55 years until My present wife said, God, he's a little aged. I work all day. I can't afford to make 2 different meals. I said, fine. My late wife would make different meals. My second wife made different meals. My first wife made different meals. As a child, I didn't like meat. I didn't want to eat any meat. So I basically was vegetarian from birth, in that sense. So Theosophy put forth parallel worlds and how frequently they concur. And then I was introduced to the writings C.W. Leadbeater, Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, Rudolf Steiner, and people of that nature. And that was my great interest, because there was so much to learn that I couldn't find anywhere else. And when I used to talk about it, my brother told me to shut up. I want people to hear me talk that way. So I became more selective with whom I would talk. But because of the meditation, I learned something was different. And all of a sudden, I found myself visiting different parts of the world, which today we call out-of-body experience, remote viewing. I could see things. I was starting to see things. And you leave the planet, you go to different planets, and you can see there are entities there too. There's a passage out of the Baha'i writings which really I like. It says something in fact, there are infinite number of planets merely in our galaxy upon which are creatures such as we. Well, I know that's true because I'd see it. I'd say 2 or 3 times a week. Somebody starts walking from the right to the left. I don't know why it's always these from the right to the left. And it's a ghost-like figure. And as a child, I used to see these things. And occasionally you talk to them. People who died, they manifest. They carry on conversations the same as you and I. That was what I learned from Theosophy, was not strange, it was normal. And the more you focus on spirituality, the more you pray and meditate to be moved towards selflessness, the more frequently that occurs.
So the position of the Theosophical Society is that these types of experiences that we might call paranormal are in fact normal. It's just a part of existence. It's a part of the nature of our existence. Are you of the opinion then, I probably know the answer to this question, but are you of the opinion then that there is such a thing as an eternal soul?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And there's a caveat there. What I understand from theosophical writings, which means I've read writings from all of the major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrian, Judaism, name them all, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, Bahaism. They all talk about it. And keep with laws of science, the concept of yin and yang, or Niels Bohr's in complementarity. If there's a body, there has to be a non-body. If there's good, there's bad. If there's right, there's wrong, up, down, whatever.
The law of opposites.
That's right. It's the law of opposite, complementarity. Therefore, if we have a body, there has to be a non-body. If you have a brain, there has to be a mind. So brain and mind are 2 different entities. Using the computers as an analogy, the mind is in the soul, the brain is in the body. The soul is the programmer, the brain is the computer. So the soul is the software. That's right. So when I hear comments such as, we only use 10% of our brain, even before I knew anything about computers, because of what I've learned from Theosophy, I used to laugh at that, because science is trying to make the reality all in the brain. That's why I like Wilder Penfield's statement, Dr. Wilder Penfield, as I recall, I think he was a neurologist. What we know about the mind, no, what we know about the brain cannot explain what we do not know about the mind. I mean, it's so obvious. So
the nature of consciousness cannot be explained by chemistry.
correct. If there's chemistry, there has to be non-chemistry. That's why I like that excerpts are read from Abdu'l-Baha, a man who was given the title the Peace Prophet in 1921 by the Queen of England. And he talks about electrons and cyclones. And he said electrons are vibratory chords that you find in the cells of the ions. And these chords vibrate at different levels. When they vibrate at one level, it's what we call consciousness, and it has to do with the physical world. When it vibrates on another level, it's called cyclones, and that is what causes telepathy and the paranormal experience. So when you look at it, when I look at it, and I see we talk about the cyclones and electrons, I immediately think, of course, complementarity, physical, non-physical. Now, in a sense, we call it non-physical, or call this physical. I don't know, but I believe we need another word to be able to define these better. Because if nothing is ever separated, and this is physical and this is non-physical, they're still part of the same whole. So I struggle with that every day. I think about it, I meditate about it, I write little short monographs about it.
Well, recently you wrote something on, for lack of a better word, reincarnation. It's called a hyperdimensional resonance. Can you tell me, first of all, why did you use the title a hyperdimensional resonance? What's the significance of that?
I initially had titled it Traditions, Transitions, and Possibilities. And purposely traditions, because traditionally people are talking about their paradigm relative to how they were educated in their religious model. And there's conflict between all these religious models, and what is humorous to me is the word religion means to make one bind together, and how can you take, for example, Christianity and divide it in 350 divisions where each one says they have a better understanding. So I thought, I'll write a paper on traditions talking about superstitions or concepts not based on factuality, because I have a very strong scientific, analytical orientation as well as I do as a paranormal focus. And I have written that monograph and was sending it to different people. And somehow, when I looked at my address book on my computer, there were two names right next to each other. Both began with Richard. I happened to press the wrong Richard. And I sent it to Richard Hoagland, the person that talks so much about the face on Mars. I have a high respect for him, really enjoy him. He's a personal friend of Dr. Edwin Jung, with whom I did this research, and Ed gave me his address in case I ever wanted to contact him. So by accident, I sent it to Richard Hoagland. So Richard Hoagland said what I was talking about is hyperdimensional resonance. So I thought, oh, that'd be a better title for this book, or this paper. So I named it the Hyperdimensional Resonance Meme, means a concept or a model. And then I finished it off. And in this particular monograph, I spelled out, I believe it's caringly and carefully, the concept of reincarnation. I originally wrote the paper to talk about reincarnation. It's valid aspects or invalid aspects. Invalid meaning it can be the concepts that are put forth by those who support reincarnation can be explained different ways. I like Carl Jung's. He was a very well-accepted person in his profession, psychiatrist. And yet, a few years before he died, he decided to reveal that he was a psychic. Now, I found that out in 1970 when I was headmaster at Krishnamurti School. And I needed a mental health worker for the students. Well, I used to study with the Theosophists for so many years in Ojai, California. I went to the Theosophical Center. And there was Dr. Lawrence Bendit, and his wife is Phoebe Payne Bendit, was a psychic. They told me they worked with Carl Jung for 15 years. Actually, Dr. Lawrence Bendit was a close associate with Carl Jung. Phoebe Payne Bendit was there because she's psychic. So Carl Jung and Phoebe Payne would look at the same, they call them patients, I call them clients, at the same client and do a psychic analysis who they were. And that's how he treated the people. For 15 years they did that. So I said, well, we need a psychiatrist for our school. He said, sure, of course, because they knew I had been a theosophist, because I had met them initially years ago, in 1966. When I met him in 66, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. So I went to see Dr. Bendit and his wife, Phoebe Payne, and he came to the door when I knocked on the door, and I was studying in the Theosophy at the time. I drive from Malibu up to Ojai, California. And he saw me at the door. I don't know what he saw to me. I said, I want to see Phoebe Payne. I didn't know it was Phoebe Payne hyphen Bendit. So I'd like to speak to Phoebe Payne. He said, no way. I don't want her near you. I thought to myself, what does he see in me? I just want help. And the voice from the back of the room says, have Stan come in. I said, how did she know my name? So the obedient had me come in. So that's when I met him initially in 1966, trying to figure out what I should do with my life. And so that stayed in my mind. Now it's 1970. I go to them for help. And they said, Carl Jung was a psychic. And all the tests that we have today came from Carl Jung, who devised these tests because he didn't want his colleagues to know that he was psychic. So these MMPIs and all these tests were devised by him. He designed them.
Wow. We're talking about reincarnation. And the hyperdimensional resonance, right. and Carl Jung's. I think you were talking about. Of course, we're talking about Carl Jung, and what I find interesting about his work was the concept of the archetype.
Right.
Memories that seem to follow us through our genes somehow, or that are deeply ingrained in our primitive psyche.
Well, what I derived from Carl Jung, or that information purported to have originated from Carl Jung, and my study of the Theosophical Society, even though they extensively put forth the concept of reincarnation among most theosophists, there are a few who define it differently, more of a scientific nature. What Carl Jung said, which is the basis of my approach to reincarnation, he said everything that ever happened, that ever will happen, is recorded in something you might refer to as a universal library or encyclopedia. And therefore, there's no need to think about the concept of reincarnation, Because when people talked about reincarnation, they want to access information from the past. And what he brought forth was you can access it without having the concept of reincarnation.
Because it's there, available
It's
in the
accessible.
universal, the subconscious.
That's correct. Therefore, there's no need to talk about coming back. And he had a very scientific approach in one sense. He said nothing goes backwards, everything goes forward. And that is what you find throughout any kind of scientific material. Nothing goes backward, everything goes forward.
I think that you mentioned in your paper the notion of, and correct me if I'm wrong, the notion of viewing the past like a image on a TV screen.
Yes. When I work with clients, I use metaphors and analogies a lot. In regards to the concept of reincarnation, if it's true, and from my perspective this, that information is recorded somewhere in the realm of the soul, or a realm that's above the soul, between the soul and what we call God, somewhere that information is there. And you can access that information without the concept of reincarnation.
This is related to the Akashic record.
Yes. And one of the means of doing it is to be consistent and devoted to achieving a stage of selflessness, which can be done through prayer and meditation and refining the physiology of your body too, so there isn't unnecessary artifact, the firing of neurons relative to use of drugs, alcohol, or other stimulants, non-prescriptive. I know we have to take prescriptive sometimes, but there's also healing that can occur without prescriptive drugs. How do I know? Because I've done it many times in my lifetime.
With respect to the nature of consciousness, there is an aspect to consciousness. Some would argue that it is the key aspect of consciousness, which is self-awareness. And I think folks would be curious to know whether or not our souls or our consciousness as we know it continues after the death of the physical body. In other words, is there a self-awareness that continues? Do we continue in a conscious state?
Well, it's interesting that you use words consciousness and awareness, and listening to how you expressed it, they become distinctly different. And that's what I put forth. I believe, my position is this, that we still do not have sufficient vocabulary with which to even begin to discuss the afterworld. I think we're at the beginning of it. I believe our species has just moved into the age of maturity and leaving adolescence. Therefore, there's going to be more concepts coming in. I just listened to my wife and other people using language in regards to their cell phones. I sometimes become bewildered. They're talking about apps. I said, what in the world is an app? And she started, I said, oh, you mean application? Yes, it's an app. I said, so what you're now doing is what we used to do in the 30s and 40s. We had something called shorthand. You made funny shapes, but it was a language. So you're doing that verbally now. You're talking shorthand. And she said, yeah, that's a good way to express it. I said, I have to. I'm autistic. I'm dyslexic. I have to put it in my understanding. So when I think of consciousness, first thing comes to my mind is, am I conscious or am I unconscious? By definition, conscious means the sensory system is working. That's a definition. Then what is unconscious? It means the sensory system is not working. Well, what is working? How can I go into meditation or sleep and be unconscious, yet I'm aware of something? So it became very clear to me, for me, is consciousness the sensory wake state, awareness is a non-sensory state, which can go on simultaneous with the conscious state, and it's primarily when we're asleep or praying or meditating. We are out of body. So out of body is awareness. So when we talk about consciousness, I say, okay, you mean the information you have, which you consciously can discuss, as you and I are discussing now, can also be accessed on another level, at a higher level, called awareness. So I see as consciousness totally related to the sensory awake state, awareness to the non-sensory, not awake state, even though the awareness can occur when you're conscious. And people say, how do you do that? I said, just what we're doing right now. You're thinking while you're listening. You're doing more than one thing at the same time. When I hear people talk about consciousness, it's confusing to me, but they're really not talking about awareness. So we need a new vocabulary to talk about the specific aspects of what today is called consciousness and specific aspects of what I learned in Theosophy and other esoteric groups, which I call awareness. So for me, they're definitely different. We have different levels of consciousness, we have different levels of awareness. That's what meditation is about. And the classic model of meditation, there's 6 different levels. That means 6 different levels of awareness. Now, Dr. Tiller said, we were talking about this one day, he said, I think there's at least 19, 20 levels of awareness. I said, so you understand what I'm saying about conscious and awareness? He said, oh yeah. Most people say, well, we have that many different levels of consciousness, but it's many different levels of awareness. The model for meditation has helped me considerably to see the difference between wake and unawake, or altered state.
Would you say that our souls, the basic nature of what we are, is filtered more or less by our physical existence? In other words, do our brains act as some kind of a filter, more or less, for our souls or our consciousness?
I use the analogy. I like analogies. They help me in metaphors and analogies. Physically, we go through various states of development. In Hinduism, they talk about the 7 levels of development physically. From the fetus to birth to childhood, pubescence, adolescence, maturity, and preparation for the transition. And according to those models in Hinduism, it is said that's where most people got the concept of reincarnation, because in that paradigm, they talked about from fetus to birth was a reincarnation, and from birth to childhood is a reincarnation. But they misunderstood the concept of what Hinduism was putting forth, and we have today that we come back again into this world. But in Hinduism, you never go back, you go forward. So in regards to I think I forgot your question.
Well, I was asking about the nature of consciousness and whether or not our physical bodies act as a filter. Our
yes.
brains act as a filter for our consciousness, and would we find ourselves in a complete state of awareness once freed of our physical existence?
Well, my understanding is that in this experience we call life is the onset of the development of both the physical body short term and development of the soul long term. The metaphor that was used, that I've read, it makes sense to me. It says out of the universal sea of consciousness, I think this is Carl Jung and also religious writings, out of the universal consciousness, one, I'll call it atom, was removed. At that point, it was removed at the moment the child was conceived in the womb of the mother. And this experience that we're having today, that you and I experience, as related to the developmental stages of the soul itself that goes through an infinite stages of development, is the first step of the development of the soul. So the first step of the development of the soul is in the body. And the next one is something not in the body, but something else. And it goes on endlessly. So the parallel is, as we as humans develop from fetus to adulthood to maturity to death, the soul does the same thing. It had a beginning, taken out of the universal consciousness, placed in a body, or they combined, and then when the body no longer functions, the soul is going to the next stage of development, as we do from birth to childhood to the different levels. The soul is doing the same thing.
Would it be possible to think of the body in this limited 3 or 4 dimensional existence as something akin to a chrysalis, perhaps?
A what?
A chrysalis, or a cocoon, like for a butterfly.
That's a good metaphor, or a good analogy. Yeah, I like that very much, because before it was before it even became a life in a cocoon, it was in the butterfly, and then it was placed in a cocoon and it went through different stages of development. I remember that in a biology class. It goes through several stages of development until it leaves the cocoon and flies. And this process goes all over. Reincarnationists would say, yeah, that's reincarnation. But I said, no, it's not the same butterfly. It's a different butterfly. Mm-hmm. One of the most common analogies used in reincarnation is the reincarnation of the tree seasonally. It has leaves. Right now we're losing the leaves. It'll come back next spring, it's reincarnated. I said, no, that's not reincarnation, because it's the cycle of the tree and its length, because eventually that tree dies. That's not reincarnation. And the leaves come and go. Some of the leaves might be seeds and create new trees, but it's not the original tree. It's not a reincarnation of the tree.
You talk about the soul, like just a moment ago you mentioned it being somewhat akin to an atom or a small piece of the universal consciousness.
Yes.
Is that God?
Well, my answer to that would be yes. That if we were taken out of the universal sea of consciousness, as Carl Jung puts, or in the Baha'i writings too, the whole purpose of that appears to be, almost whimsically, it appears to be we were taking out of this universal sea of consciousness to go through all these experiences so we can refine ourselves to get back to where we started. Because there's one prayer, passage out of a book titled Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. And it says in this passage, this confession of helplessness that ultimately every mature mind is impelled to make is the acme of human understanding and a culmination of man's development. I look at that and I say, I understand. In this process, where we're given individuality, because we call ourselves by a certain name, we have a certain identification of the body, we think we're not part of this greatest force, God. But actually, it's just another form of that creative force from which we began and where we'll end. And the difference of the experience is how well we work at being selfless so we can give back without the pain and problems we have in the process from the beginning to the transition to the end.
Does love matter?
Oh, absolutely. Love, compassion, selflessness, forgiveness, all are aspects of the development of the soul. In fact, on that monograph, I'm writing another monograph. It talks about the 4 states of matter. Well, with the concept of yin-yang or complementarity, I'm writing a paper on the 4 non-states of matter. If we have 4 states, then there has to be 4 non-states. And if the non-states, interesting enough, that you should say love, I have love as one of those elements of the non-state. And I think I have 27 different aspects or definitions of love. And I'm glad you asked that. I forgot about that. I sometimes forget what I've written and what I've said. Yes, definitely. Love is not merely a word. Love is a power source we have yet to define because we do not have the vocabulary to define it any more than we have a vocabulary to clearly define consciousness.
Are love and consciousness directly related?
I believe love and awareness are directly related. I believe love is part of awareness. Forgiveness is a part of awareness. And it manifests in a conscious state in the manner in which we talk, the manner in which we believe, and the manner in which we think.
I think it's fairly well established from a physical standpoint that all points in space are connected. Some would even say that all points in space and time are connected. And perhaps even take that a little bit further to say that there really is no such thing as distance, or really any such thing as time. What is your take on that?
I'll repeat what I said before. We need new words, new language, new concept. When I began studying with the Theosophical Society, one of the person's names that comes to my mind now is called Paracelsus, late 1400s, early 1500s. And when I read that, I said, now I understand. What he said was this: space is crystallized energy. It's not a something that separates us, it's a something that connects us. So everything throughout our universe, and the universe of the universes, everything is always connected. But because we are just in the process, human beings, are going through stages of development at the first level, meaning soul, body, we are so limited to, one, for language, two, for being able to comprehend it. It would be much the same as you, as a professional of law, trying to explain how to argue a case to a preschooler, or for Dr. Tiller and people such as yourself, who are far advanced physicists, to such a degree that other physicists don't even understand what he's saying. And they denounce him because he has a language which is different than they understand. They haven't reached the level of development sufficient enough to understand it. Therefore, in regards to your question, at this point, as being as human beings, there's no way we can adequately understand it until we've developed a language with which to study it. We can't even study it if we don't have a language to understand it. And that doesn't come in the life of the first stage of the development of a species. That's another thing I like to point out. Our species goes through various stages of development as we do as human beings. Now, because we cannot answer, or I cannot answer your question adequately now, doesn't mean that a millennia forward, that our species at time will not be able to understand it then. I believe it will, to a better degree, but not infinitely, because the only infinite source can understand infinity.
We talked earlier, and you mentioned something earlier about Dr. Jung's psychic ability.
Yes.
How do psychics do what they do?
I'm thinking about how to reply to that. In theosophy, and in religious, especially, say religious writings, especially Baha'i writings, it says, do not strive to do psychic things. There is such a thing as the soul. And if you strive to do something psychic, try to learn to do something psychically, you actually retard the development of the soul. Therefore, that statement means that the soul develops too. So if we were born physically, and at that point the soul was taken out of the universality of consciousness and placed in that process of birth, then the development of our species is infinite, even though our body is not. The development of our soul is infinite, but don't misconstrue that our soul is the same as the species. The species itself has its soul, its entity. We as individuals are part of that, but we're distinctly separate.
So how are psychics able to communicate?
Sure.
How are they able to derive this information that purportedly some of us can't?
I can explain to you. There are some people who work to do intentionally to develop a psychic ability. I don't call it ability, but having a psychic experience. In doing so, they can have it, but it actually deters it from developing further. It actually retards, it goes backwards. So the more the person tries to develop, the less often it occurs. Also, it affects the development of the soul from going forward quickly. It slows it down, doesn't stop, it slows it down. And it's very important, I believe, to understand as much as we are different physically as human beings, we are different psychically. We have different intelligence. In no way could I ever do the work that Dr. Tiller does. I'm not sure I can do your work. I can work as a mediator, but I can't work as an attorney. We're different. So in regards to psychic ability, my focus is related to the species and not to the individual. The species has a psychic ability. It occurs in different degrees and different levels in different people. It doesn't make them good or bad, it just makes them different. And when that psychic experience occurs, it's to be used not selfishly, but for the benefit of the other person, especially for the benefit of the species. So, because as a high jumper, I can clear 6 feet, or not anymore, I used to, it doesn't mean that I was better than someone else, because in all respects, it's just I was different in the sense that I could jump. But I can't do many things. I can't sing. I can't play instruments, musical instruments.
So we're saying it's a matter of innate ability and talent, perhaps.
It's the ability, I don't even like to call it ability. It's an experience that occurs within the species. And different parts of the species has different levels when it occurs. And when it occurs, it's very important to share it and use it for the benefit of the other person, but don't take payment for it. And Theosophy says, never take payment. The payment is a blessing from God, but never take money for a psychic experience. It deters its occurrence. So the Theosophy is very religious in that sense. I want to emphasize, it's an inherent part of the species. As the species develops more and more, if you and I would believe in reincarnation, and we came back 100,000 years from now, and we were a species then, we would talk about psychic beliefs far different, because the species would have already advanced so far, it would be something else. So it's an aspect of our species in its developmental stage at this point. But do not, my encouragement, do not confuse it with being something specific with an individual where it can be taught or learned. Now, certainly as we become more selfless, we become more aware of other things around us. Because if we're selfish, we create blindfolds. And if we become less selfish, we see more things. As we see more things, that as I understand it, conceivably, you'll start seeing things, what you might call the psychic nature.
I had a short conversation with John Edward a few months back,
yes.
that we talked about, and what I think I got out of our conversation was that what he does is kind of pick up on a signal. You know, as you know, he talks to people that have passed on, or he receives messages from people that it looks to me like he actually has conversations with them. But what he would say is that he tunes into them almost kind of like a radio signal, and they're just kind of always there, almost in this white noise sort of.
I agree. I've had those since I was a child. Those have passed. We call them passed away and died. They manifest. I don't just hear the voice, I see the person as much as I see you. And we carry on a conversation. There are other times I hear it. Many times somebody will call, especially this woman from Jackson, she'll call and say, I just called to say hello. And all of a sudden, I find myself talking, and I feel I was discourteous. For example, she called and said, I said, do you have cancer on the left breast? She says, what? I said, I see a little black spot. I said, I don't want to be discourteous, but are you having a problem? She says, yes, I have a black spot there. I said, well, it looks like it's cancer. She said, well, they thought it was cancer too. They did an injection, broke the needle off the breast. They still haven't removed it.
And you were able to visualize that?
Yeah, I could see it. Not because I tried, it just happens. And that's in keeping with John Edwards, who was saying he suddenly hears things. It's very common for me to hear or see something. And sometimes I share it, sometimes I don't. She was my supervisor, starting my internship in psychology. And about a year later, she called and we started dating and we got married. And she was saying, something different about you. And I said, why? She says, if you walk a room and I'm reading, you burn out the lights. I said, well, yeah, I don't burn out the lights. She said, yeah, they quit working. Is this that psychic garble you talk about? And that's what you call it, psychic garble. I said, well, I guess you can call it garble. It's just sharing experience with you. I said, there's something wrong with you. I think you have cancer. So why do you say that? I see you lying on a bed. And The edge of the bed is right here in your intestines, and you're coughing and gagging. I said, I think you have cancer of your lung. She said, oh, you know, it's like psychic garble. Nothing wrong with me. 11 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer of her left lung. Tumors attached to her heart. She coughed so hard it ripped open her heart. And I did the Heimlich maneuver to try to keep from drowning. Of course, it just emptied blood. So 2 years ago, maybe a little less, I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, thinking about this problem I have with the financial of my car wash in Eden, Utah. And I'm thinking, because my wife gets up at 5:30, she goes downstairs, starts preparing breakfast. I get up about 5 to 6. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed and I'm thinking about this issue. All of a sudden there's a tapping on my head. I could hear it and I could feel it. So I thought it was my wife Helen, who I call Hodge. That's her initials, H-O-J. So the voice says to me, Stan, don't worry about it, everything's okay. I thought, when did Hodge start calling me Stan? She calls me Stanislav. Jamal couldn't say Stanislav no matter how much he tried, so she called me Stan. So I looked to my right, and there was Jamal sitting on the bed next to me. I'm looking at her and I said, let's see, I've got an engineering background. I'm a licensed psychologist in 2 states. Used to be licensed in 2 other states. Why don't you do an assessment? And she's talking all this time. So I looked at her as well. I don't recognize her clothing. She looks the same. Oh, the bed is depressed. Well, that's interesting. So she's talking and I'm responding to her. But meantime, I'm looking all this thing, doing an assessment, such as anybody who has a obsessive nature, I'll look for information. Just then there was a clicking behind me from the door. Hodge was entering the bedroom. I got excited. I said, Hodge, come on over quick. I wanted her to see Jamal. She came over and stood next to me. I said, what's wrong? I said, Jamal was just here. She was talking to me. I said, look, the bed is depressed. And Hodge said, that's nice. Come on downstairs. Breakfast is ready. Of course, she believes in all this, and she knows I have this experience constantly. And besides, she studied shamanism for about over a period of 3 years. So she believes these things too. She just got nonchalant. But I did an assessment. The bed was depressed. I could see it when she was sitting there, and when she was no longer there, you could see somebody had been sitting there. I don't work at doing those things, but what I find, or what I've discovered, is the more I let go of wanting it to happen, the more frequently it occurs. And that's in keeping with theosophy and religious writings.
If someone were to want to perhaps learn more or do more with respect to learning about their own spirituality, would you suggest meditation, prayer, things of that nature?
Yeah. Meditation is a process that gets you in an altered state. When you really are in a meditative state, you're in an altered state. It's an oxymoron. The more you're on it, the more self-involved you are. So the less self-involved you are, the more possibly for those experiences to occur.
Yeah.
I believe that when my observation is, or has been, for those who are more selfless, those experiences occur more often. Now, if we took 1,000 people and then we assess that they all were selfless, it doesn't mean they're all going to have the same experience. Because again, I want to emphasize, it's part of the species. But one of the benefits of becoming selfless as much as you can, it's not only good for you, it's good for the species. So I want to keep emphasizing, think of the species as an entity in itself and do what you can to improve the existence of that species. In doing so, different things begin to occur on different levels, and some of those are what they call psychic experiences. Mm-hmm. Meditation, in a sense, and prayer might be one of the processes to bring to life those vibratory chords in the cell, in the ion. Because that's how I understand it. The more one works towards spirituality, the more the vibrations of that chord. Does that mean that everyone will have an increase, the same increase in the vibratory chord? No, but there will be an increase. Some will increase more, some less. It's to be happy moment to moment, second to second, that you are doing what you can to help our species, to create peace in this world, equality in this world, and to exemplify being courteous, and to have a lot of joy, and to laugh at even your misery, and to know that when we have what most people call trouble, they're not troubles. It's not God getting even with us. Actually, those troubles would be best defined as tests and difficulties. And the greater the test and difficulty we have is a direct measure of what our potential is to which we can move towards. So if we look forward to these vicissitudes of life and smile at them, they no longer are troubles, they're learning experiences.
Is there a method of meditation that you would recommend above others?
Yes, I've been exposed to many. The one that I've considered most profound and the most detailed and godlike is a classic one out of Hinduism. And what I like about it, it speaks to the individual, herself or himself. For example, if you have a flexible body, you can do what they call the lotus position. The purpose of the lotus position actually is technical. It's to decrease the flow of blood down to the lower extremities so the heart slows down its beat. The more you slow down the beat of the heart, the less neural artifact you have. However, I cannot do that. I'm not that flexible, so I cannot do the lotus position. When I see these classic things when they're sitting in lotus position doing this is contrary to the concept of meditation because you're causing neural artifact, pinching your fingers. Now, if you want to heal, you can do some qigong healing by touching different parts of the finger, but not for meditation. So for those who cannot do that, they have what's called the Egyptian position, is the one that I am in right now. In this one, your legs are neither extended or retracted, and your arms are supported by armrests. That means it reduces the artifact of the firing of the muscles, because the trapezes will not fire because the arms are supported. So the idea is reduce the amount of artifact as much as you can. But never lie down to meditate. Otherwise, you're giving the body two signals. Lying down means go to sleep. Meditation means focus. Well, they're opposites. So don't lie down and meditate. I hear people say, oh yes, I was meditating today, I ran a mile. I said, that's an oxymoron. You can't meditate when you, by definition. You can call it something else. I think it's wonderful that you can go out of body if you have an altered state. But we'd have to measure your oxygen level and find out why you're in that state. There's so many things. So the classic one is the Egyptian models like this. If you do lotus position, do that. And you start the process by thinking, getting yourself ready for meditation. Thinking is the process of getting ready. Contemplation is to be, I'll say, conscious and aware of how many thoughts are going through your mind. And as they go through your mind, the ones that are of interest to you, take it and store it somewhere in your psyche so you can get back to another time. And the others, just get rid of them. As you go through that process of contemplation, you finally get so laser-like in your focus, you have one something that you're going to focus on. At that point, you're in altered state. And when you're in altered state, you're accessing information from the universal library.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into a higher level of meditation, see, most people talk about meditation as they funnel ahead. It's not. Meditation in the classic model is one step of 6 steps of meditation. Even though there's a meditation level, it's only part of the whole process of meditation. When you get so laser-like, when you're in that meditative state, you now get into what they call forgot the name. I said it a little earlier. Funny.
Meditative state?
The next state is it's a higher level of meditation before you get to the soul state and God state. But the next level is that
Nirvana? The nirvanic state?
Nirvanic state, that's it. So the next state after the meditative state is the nirvanic state. That's level number 4. In a nirvanic state, you can go wherever you want because you're there. Mm-hmm. And you can access information anywhere, whether it's on this planet, another planet, this realm, another realm. That's what nirvana, it's really an out of state. And when you're a soul state, you're the step between nirvanic state and return to God. And when you're in God state, you're no longer human. You're back to God.
Yeah. Stanislav, thank you for sitting with me today and talking.
I enjoyed very much, and thank you for the opportunity. And I apologize for any incoherence. It's been my want to make sure I always express this as my focus, my experience, and to put it forth as a concept and never as an absolute.
You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
Though he is now well into his 90s, Stanislav continues to study and write as he has always done. And his interest in UFOs and the paranormal persists even now. I cannot begin to elaborate on the number of things I have learned from Stanislav or the profound ways in which he has influenced my thinking. My hope is that one day the important and pivotal role he has played in the history and development of academic paranormal and parapsychological research will be recognized and celebrated. Thank you once again for listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you again next week, right here on the official MUFON podcast.